When the Galactic Council discovered Zerath Prime, they found creatures so adorable that every species in the known universe wanted one as a companion. These small, fluffy beings with their large eyes and gentle purring became the most sought-after pets across 1,000 worlds. But there was something the Council didn't understand about these creatures, something that would cost entire civilizations their lives. Every species that took a Zerathian as a pet faced the same mysterious fate: complete disappearance. Planets went silent. Space stations became graveyards. Yet the creatures remained, somehow always surviving, always waiting for the next species to find them irresistible. All advanced civilizations learned to fear them. All except humans, who had just joined the galactic community and refused to listen to warnings about dangerous pets. What happened next would prove that sometimes the most foolish species might just be the wisest, and that understanding true loyalty requires looking beyond appearances. This is the story of humanity's greatest discovery and the galaxy's most dangerous misunderstanding. Captain Sarah Chen had seen many strange things during her 3 years as humanity's first deep space explorer, but nothing prepared her for the sight that greeted her when she stepped onto the abandoned Zephyrian research station. The massive facility that once housed over 10,000 of the galaxy's most brilliant scientists now drifted silent and cold through the void, its corridors filled with an eerie stillness that made her skin crawl. "Control, this is Explorer Team Alpha," Sarah spoke into her communicator as she swept her flashlight across the pristine hallway. "We've gained entry to Research Station Kronos. No signs of life detected, but the facility appears to be in perfect condition." Her team of 6 humans moved cautiously through the station's main corridor. The lights were still functioning, the air was clean and breathable, and all systems showed green on their scanners. It was as if everyone had simply vanished into thin air. "Copy that, Alpha Team," came the voice of mission control from Earth. "Remember, the Galactic Council classified this as a Category 5 abandoned site. Proceed with extreme caution. Dr. Marcus Webb, the team's xenobiologist, ran his scanner along the walls. "Captain, this is fascinating. The biometric readings show that lifeforms were present here as recently as 3 days ago, but there's no trace of struggle, no signs of violence, and no indication of emergency evacuation." Sarah frowned as they reached the main laboratory complex. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy for their advanced research capabilities and their obsession with documenting everything. If something had happened here, there should be records, emergency logs, something to indicate what went wrong. "Split up and check the research bays," Sarah ordered. "Teams of 2, stay in constant communication. We need to find out what happened to 10,000 highly intelligent beings." The first 3 research bays they checked were empty but showed clear signs of recent activity. Experiments had been left running, data screens still displayed active research projects, and personal items remained scattered on workstations as if their owners had stepped away for just a moment. It was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the team's communication specialist, who made the first significant discovery. "Captain, you need to see this," her voice crackled through the communicator from Research Bay 7. "I've found something incredible." Sarah and her partner, Engineer Tom Harrison, quickly made their way to Rodriguez's location. As they entered the bay, they found Rodriguez and Security Officer James Park standing before a large transparent containment unit. Inside, curled up on what appeared to be a soft, cushioned surface, was a small creature unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. The being was roughly the size of a house cat, covered in soft, iridescent fur that shifted between silver and deep blue as it moved. It had large, expressive eyes that seemed to hold an almost human-like intelligence, and, when it noticed the humans observing it, it made a soft, melodic sound that was somewhere between a purr and a gentle song. "By the stars," Dr. Webb breathed as he joined them. "It's beautiful." The creature slowly approached the transparent barrier, its eyes fixed on the humans with what appeared to be curiosity rather than fear. As it moved, Sarah noticed that its fur seemed to shimmer with an inner light, creating patterns that were both hypnotic and strangely comforting. "Captain," Rodriguez said, checking her translation device, "I've been running the station's records through our systems. This creature is called a Zerathian, and, according to the files, it was the primary subject of research here." Sarah studied the creature more closely. Despite the advanced containment unit, the being didn't seem distressed or imprisoned. If anything, it appeared comfortable, almost content. The containment field was active, but the creature made no attempt to escape or show any signs of wanting to leave. "What were they studying it for?" Tom asked, his engineer's mind already working on the technical aspects of the containment system. Rodriguez scrolled through the translated files on her device. It says here that Zerathians were discovered about 50 years ago on a planet called Zerath Prime. They quickly became popular as companion animals throughout the galaxy because of their gentle nature, intelligence, and their apparent ability to form deep emotional bonds with their caregivers. Dr. Webb was taking detailed scans of the creature. The biometric readings are fascinating, Captain. This being shows extremely complex neural activity, far more sophisticated than what you'd expect from a typical pet. Its brain patterns suggest high intelligence, possibly even sapient-level cognition. The Zerathian seemed to respond to Webb's scanner, tilting its head in a way that reminded Sarah of a curious dog. When it made that soft, musical sound again, she felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. "There's more in the files," Rodriguez continued, her voice becoming more concerned. "It says that while Zerathians were extremely popular as pets, there were some incidents." "What kind of incidents?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to have a sinking feeling about the answer. Species that kept Zerathians as pets experienced what the records call unexplained disappearances. Entire families, sometimes entire communities, would vanish without a trace. The only things left behind were the Zerathians themselves, apparently unharmed and waiting for new caregivers. James Park, ever the security officer, immediately drew his weapon. "Captain, we should consider this creature extremely dangerous." But, even as he spoke, the Zerathian moved to the part of its containment closest to him and lay down, exposing its belly in what was clearly a submissive, non-threatening gesture. Its large eyes seemed to convey a sense of sadness and longing that made Park hesitate. Dr. Webb continued his scans. "I'm not detecting any obvious weapons or defensive capabilities. No signs of toxic secretions, no hidden claws or teeth, no evidence of psychic or psionic abilities. From a biological standpoint, this creature appears completely harmless." "But, if it's harmless, what happened to the researchers?" Tom asked, voicing what they were all thinking. Rodriguez found more files. According to these records, Research Station Kronos was specifically established to study Zerathians in a controlled environment. The Galactic Council wanted to understand why these creatures seemed to be connected to the disappearances, but also why they were so irresistibly appealing to every known sapient species. Sarah watched the creature as Rodriguez read. It had settled into a resting position but kept its eyes on the humans, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it was studying them just as intently as they were studying it. "The research team made several important discoveries," Rodriguez continued. "First, Zerathians appear to be empathically sensitive. They can sense and respond to the emotional states of nearby sapient beings. Second, they form incredibly strong bonds with their caregivers, showing signs of genuine affection and loyalty that go beyond typical animal behavior." Dr. Webb looked up from his scanner. "Captain, there's something else. This creature's neural patterns are changing as it observes us. It's almost as if it's learning our behavioral patterns and adapting its responses accordingly." The Zerathian suddenly stood and approached the barrier again, this time focusing its attention entirely on Sarah. As their eyes met, she felt that warm sensation again, stronger this time, accompanied by an almost overwhelming sense of peace and contentment. "The third discovery," Rodriguez said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "was that Zerathians seemed to choose their companions rather than the other way around. Every documented case of a person taking a Zerathian as a pet began with the creature showing clear preference for that particular individual." Sarah found herself moving closer to the containment unit. The creature's eyes seemed to hold depths of intelligence and emotion that were almost human in their complexity. When it made that soft, musical sound again, she realized it was specifically directed at her. "Captain," James warned, "we should maintain our distance until we understand what we're dealing with." But Sarah was already studying the containment controls. The system was sophisticated but not complicated, typical Zephyrian over-engineering that made simple tasks unnecessarily complex. She could see that the creature wasn't actually imprisoned. The containment field was set to minimum power, more like a protective barrier than a prison. "Rodriguez, what was the final conclusion of the research team? Did they figure out what causes the disappearances?" "The files end abruptly, Captain. The last entry was 3 days ago, and it just says breakthrough achieved. The truth is not what we expected. Beginning final phase of testing." Dr. Webb's scanner suddenly chirped with an alert. "Captain, I'm detecting some unusual energy readings from the creature. Nothing dangerous, but there's definitely something we're not seeing here." The Zerathians seemed to sense their growing understanding. It moved to the center of its containment area and sat perfectly still, its eyes moving from one human to another as if evaluating each of them. When its gaze finally settled on Sarah again, it made a different sound, still musical, but longer and more complex, almost like a greeting or an introduction. "I think it's trying to communicate with us," Dr. Webb said, excitement creeping into his voice. "The neural activity spikes every time it makes that sound, and the patterns suggest intentional communication rather than simple vocalization." Sarah made a decision that she knew could change everything. She approached the containment controls and began the deactivation sequence. "I'm going to let it out." "Captain, that might not be wise," James protested, though he kept his weapon lowered. "Think about it," Sarah said as she worked with the controls. "If this creature was truly dangerous, why would 10,000 of the galaxy's smartest scientists study it for months in a minimal containment field? And why would it be showing such clear signs of wanting to interact with us rather than trying to escape?" The containment field flickered and deactivated. The Zerathian remained exactly where it was, making no move to leave its designated area. Instead, it looked directly at Sarah and made that complex musical sound again, this time with what sounded distinctly like gratitude. Sarah knelt down and extended her hand toward the creature. "Hello there. Can you understand us?" The Zerathian slowly approached, moving with careful, deliberate steps that seemed designed to appear non-threatening. When it reached Sarah's hand, it gently touched her fingers with what appeared to be a soft, padded appendage similar to a paw. The moment their skin made contact, Sarah's world changed. She didn't lose consciousness or experience any kind of mental invasion. Instead, she was suddenly flooded with emotions and images that weren't her own, but somehow felt completely natural and right. She saw the Zerathian's perspective of the research station, months of kind treatment from the Zephyrian scientists, genuine affection from creatures who truly cared about its well-being, and a growing sense of contentment and belonging. She felt its confusion and sadness when its caregivers began to disappear, and its desperate hope that these new beings might finally understand what it had been trying to communicate all along. Most importantly, she realized that the Zerathian wasn't just an intelligent creature, it was a person, with thoughts, feelings, hopes, and fears as complex as any humans. And it had been trying to save the very people who had disappeared, not harm them. Sarah opened her eyes and found herself looking into the creature's expressive gaze with complete understanding. The truth about the disappearances wasn't what anyone had expected, and humanity was about to discover why they might be the only species in the galaxy capable of truly understanding these remarkable beings. As if sensing her realization, the Zerathian made that soft, musical sound again, and this time Sarah understood it perfectly. It wasn't just a sound, it was a word in a language that transcended species barriers, and it meant exactly what she hoped it would mean. "Hello." The connection Sarah felt with the Zerathian was unlike anything in human experience. It wasn't telepathy in the science fiction sense, she couldn't read the creature's thoughts or have it read hers. Instead, it was more like perfect empathic understanding, as if they were two parts of a whole that had finally been reunited. "Captain, are you all right?" Dr. Webb's voice seemed to come from very far away, though he was standing right next to her. Sarah slowly stood, her hand still in contact with the Zerathian. The creature, she now understood its name was something like Zeph, though the actual sound was far more complex and beautiful than human vocal cords could produce, moved with her, maintaining the physical connection that allowed their minds to touch. "I'm more than all right, Marcus. I understand now." Sarah looked at her team with wonder. "This isn't a pet. This is a fully sapient being with intelligence that rivals our own. And the disappearances, they weren't what we thought." Through her connection with Zeph, Sarah could sense the creature's eagerness to explain, combined with a deep sadness about what had happened to its previous caregivers. The truth was both simpler and more complex than any of the galaxy's scientists had realized. Dr. Rodriguez was frantically checking her translation software. "Captain, I'm reading some incredible energy patterns here. The quantum resonance between you and the creature is off the charts, but it's completely stable. It's as if you're operating on the same wavelength." James Park kept his weapon ready but lowered. "Captain, with respect, how do we know this isn't some kind of mind control? Every species that's interacted with these creatures has vanished." Sarah could feel Zeph's distress at the suggestion, and she understood why. Because they didn't vanish, James. They transcended. She helped the team understand what Zeph was showing her through their connection. Zerathians were indeed empathically sensitive, but their true nature was far more remarkable than anyone had realized. They were what could only be described as evolutionary catalysts, beings whose very existence could trigger the next stage of development in other sapient species. The Zerathians don't just form bonds with other beings, Sarah explained, her voice filled with wonder. They facilitate a transformation that allows their companions to exist on a higher plane of consciousness. The disappearances weren't deaths or abductions, they were graduations. Dr. Webb began running every scanner he had. Captain, that's theoretically possible, but the energy requirements for such a transformation would be enormous. How could a creature this small facilitate something like that? Through Zeph, Sarah could sense the answer. Zerathians weren't small at all, their physical forms were just three-dimensional projections of beings that existed primarily in higher dimensional space. What everyone saw as a cute, harmless pet was actually a powerful entity capable of bridging the gap between physical and metaphysical existence. But, if that's true, Tom said, his engineer's mind working through the implications, why hasn't this transformation happened to you yet, Captain? You've been in contact with it for several minutes now. The answer came through Zeph's emotional response, and Sarah felt both pride and sadness in the creature's reaction. Because humans are different. Every other species the Zerathians encountered was ready for transcendence, they had evolved to a point where the next step was to leave physical existence behind. But, humans. She paused, feeling Zeph's complex emotions about humanity. Humans aren't ready yet. We're still growing, still learning, still becoming what we're meant to be. Zeph and its kind recognize this, and, instead of forcing transcendence, they're offering something else entirely. What kind of something else? Rodriguez asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. Sarah could feel Zeph's excitement as the creature sensed her team's growing understanding. Partnership. True partnership between physical and metaphysical beings. The Zerathians want to help humanity reach its full potential, but they want to do it gradually, naturally, as part of a voluntary relationship rather than forced evolution. Dr. Webb's scanners were going crazy. Captain, the energy readings are incredible. It's as if spacetime itself is being gently manipulated in a localized field around you and the creature. Zeph moved away from Sarah's hand but remained close, and she found that the empathic connection remained strong even without physical contact. The creature was showing her more now, images of Zerath Prime, where its species had waited for eons for the right partners to arrive. The Zerathians have been alone for millions of years, Sarah continued, translating Zeph's emotional communication. They transcended physical limitations long ago, but they remained in this dimensional space because they were waiting for the right species to form a symbiotic relationship with. And they think humans are that species? James asked, finally, holstering his weapon as he began to understand that Zeph posed no threat. Not think, no. Sarah smiled as she felt Zeph's certainty. Humans have something that every other species they encountered lacked, the ability to maintain individual identity while forming deep, meaningful bonds with others. Every other species either remained too isolated to benefit from the partnership or became so integrated that they lost their individual selves in the process. Dr. Webb was studying his readings with growing excitement. This is incredible. Captain, if what you're saying is true, we're looking at the greatest discovery in human history. A species that could help us understand the nature of consciousness itself. Zeph seemed to approve of Webb's enthusiasm, and Sarah felt the creature's desire to share more. Through their connection, she began to understand the true scope of what the Zerathians were offering. There's more, Sarah said. The Zerathians don't just offer partnership to individuals, they're offering it to our entire species. But, it has to be voluntary, it has to be based on mutual respect and understanding, and it has to preserve what makes us human. Tom scratched his head. That sounds almost too good to be true. What's the catch? The catch, Sarah learned from Zeph, was that humanity would have to prove they were worthy of such a partnership. The Zerathians had been disappointed before by species that seemed promising but ultimately proved to be either too aggressive, too passive, or too willing to give up their essential nature for power. The Zephyrians and the others who disappeared, they weren't forced to transcend, Sarah explained. They chose it because they had reached the end of their evolutionary path. But humans are still writing their story. Zeph's people want to help us write it better, longer, with more possibilities than we ever imagined. Rodriguez was taking detailed recordings of everything. Captain, we need to report this to Earth immediately. The implications are staggering. But Zeph's emotional response to that suggestion was complex, a mixture of hope and concern that Sarah interpreted carefully. Zeph says we need to be very careful about how we share this information. Not all humans will be ready to understand or accept what the Zerathians are offering. What do you mean? James asked. Through her connection with Zeph, Sarah could see the potential futures that worried the Zerathian. Humans who would try to exploit the partnership for personal gain, governments that would attempt to weaponize Zerathian abilities, and individuals who would be so overwhelmed by the possibilities that they would lose themselves in the process. The Zerathians are offering us a chance to become more than we are, Sarah said, but only if we can prove that becoming more won't mean becoming less human. They want partners, not servants or masters. Dr. Webb looked up from his scanners. Captain, there's something else. I'm detecting multiple energy signatures similar to our friend here throughout this station. I think there are more Zerathians on board. Zeph's emotional response confirmed Webb's discovery, and Sarah understood that the research station had been home to several Zerathians, each forming bonds with different members of the research team. The transcendence that had claimed the Zephyrian scientists hadn't been a single event but a gradual process as each being chose their own path forward. How many? Sarah asked. Through Zeph, she learned that there were currently 12 other Zerathians on the station, each waiting to see how humanity would respond to this first contact. They had chosen to remain behind when their previous companions transcended, hoping that the next species to find them might be the partners they had been searching for. 12, Sarah told her team. And they're all waiting to meet us. The implications were staggering. If humans could form successful partnerships with the Zerathians, it could mean access to technologies and understandings that were currently beyond human comprehension. But it also meant taking on the responsibility of being worthy partners to beings whose capabilities far exceeded human limitations. Tom was already thinking practically. Captain, if we're going to do this right, we need to establish protocols. We can't just have people randomly bonding with interdimensional beings without understanding what we're getting into. Zeph's response to that suggestion was one of approval and relief. The creature understood the importance of careful, measured progress, and Sarah could sense that this was exactly the kind of thoughtful approach that gave the Zerathians hope about humanity's potential. Zeph agrees, Sarah said. In fact, that's exactly what they want, humans who approach this partnership with wisdom, caution, and respect for both species involved. Dr. Rodriguez looked around the pristine but empty research station. Captain, we have a unique opportunity here. This facility is perfectly equipped for xenobiological research, and we have willing subjects who actually want to help us understand them. The idea of turning the abandoned Zephyrian research station into humanity's first Zerathian contact facility appealed to both Sarah and Zeph. The station already had everything they would need, and its location in neutral space made it ideal for the kind of careful, controlled first contact that both species needed. That could work, Sarah mused. But we'd need the right people, scientists and explorers who can approach this with open minds but also appropriate caution. James had been quiet for several minutes, but now he spoke up. Captain, I have to ask the hard question. What if this goes wrong? What if humans prove to be incompatible with Zerathian partnership? What happens then? Sarah felt Zeph's sadness at the question, but also its understanding of why it needed to be asked. Through their connection, she sensed the creature's deep hope that humanity would succeed where others had failed, but also its acceptance that failure was always possible. If humans prove unworthy of the partnership, Sarah said quietly, the Zerathians will wait for the next species to find them. They've been waiting for millions of years already. They can wait longer if necessary. But, as Sarah spoke those words, she felt Zeph's determination that such an outcome wouldn't be necessary. The creature had seen something in humanity during their brief contact that convinced it that humans were indeed the partners the Zerathians had been seeking. The question now was whether the rest of humanity would prove Zeph's faith justified. As Sarah looked at her team, brave, curious, thoughtful individuals who had approached this unprecedented situation with exactly the kind of wisdom and caution that the Zerathians valued, she felt confident that they would. The real test, however, would come when word of this discovery reached Earth and humanity as a whole had to decide how to respond to the greatest opportunity in their species' history. 3 weeks had passed since Captain Sarah Chen's team established the first human Zerathian research facility aboard the former Zephyrian station. What had begun as an investigation into mysterious disappearances had become humanity's most important scientific endeavor, and the results were beyond anything Sarah could have imagined. Dr. Elena Martinez, Earth's leading xenopsychologist, floated through the station's main laboratory in the low-gravity environment, observing the interactions between human researchers and their Zerathian partners. Each pairing was unique, creating bonds that seemed to bring out the best qualities in both species. Dr. Chen, Martinez called to Sarah, who was working with Zeph on what appeared to be a complex mathematical problem displayed in three-dimensional light patterns. I need to discuss the latest reports from Earth. The Global Council is getting nervous about our progress here. Sarah looked up from her work with Zeph, the Zerathian, making a soft, questioning sound that had become familiar to everyone on the station. Over the past 3 weeks, Zeph had learned to communicate basic concepts through a combination of sounds, gestures, and the empathic connection it shared with Sarah, while Sarah had begun to understand the subtle emotional nuances that made up Zerathian language. What kind of nervous? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Martinez pulled up a holographic display showing news reports and government communications from Earth. The kind that comes from fear of losing control. Some factions are calling for immediate military intervention to secure Zerathian technology. Others want to ban all contact until we better understand the risks. And a few extremist groups are claiming that the Zerathians are planning an invasion using human collaborators. Dr. Webb looked up from his workstation where he was partnered with a Zerathian he'd named Echo due to its habit of perfectly mimicking complex scientific concepts after observing them once. But that's completely backwards. The Zerathians are offering us partnership, not conquest. Fear rarely responds to logic, Martinez replied. The problem is that Earth's leadership is receiving conflicting reports about what's happening here. Some sources are describing miraculous scientific breakthroughs, while others are warning about humans disappearing into some kind of alien collective consciousness. Sarah felt Zeph's distress through their connection. The Zerathian understood enough human language to follow the conversation, and the idea that humans might reject the partnership filled it with deep sadness. Through their bond, Sarah could sense that Zeph's entire species was watching this experiment with hope and growing concern. The truth is that both reports are partially correct, Sarah admitted. We are achieving incredible breakthroughs. Tom and his Zerathian partner Flux have revolutionized our understanding of dimensional engineering. Rodriguez and Harmony have made discoveries about consciousness that will transform psychology and philosophy. But we're also changing as individuals. Martinez nodded grimly. That's exactly what has Earth worried. The psychological profiles we're receiving show that everyone here has undergone significant personality development. You're all more confident, more creative, more emotionally stable, and more intellectually capable than when you arrived. And that's a bad thing? Webb asked incredulously. It is if people think you're being mind-controlled, Martinez replied. The fear is that the Zerathians are gradually converting humans into something non-human. Sarah stood and walked to the large observation window that looked out into space. Zeph followed her, as it always did, the two having become inseparable over their time together. Through the window, she could see the small shuttle that had brought Martinez and a team of observers from Earth. Elena, do I seem like I'm being controlled to you? Martinez studied Sarah carefully. The captain was indeed different from the person she had been 3 weeks ago. She moved with greater confidence, spoke with deeper insight, and seemed to possess an inner calm that hadn't been there before. But she was still recognizably Sarah Chen, with all her human quirks, emotions, and individual personality intact. No, Martinez admitted, you seem like a better version of yourself. But that's almost more frightening to some people than obvious mind control would be. Zeph made a complex sound that Sarah had learned indicated deep thought and concern. Through their connection, she could sense the creature's struggle to understand human fear of improvement and growth. The Zerathians don't understand why humans would be afraid of becoming better, Sarah explained to the group. In their experience, conscious beings naturally seek growth and development. The idea that a species would resist positive change is completely alien to them. Dr. Park, who had formed a partnership with a Zerathian called SHIELD due to its protective instincts, joined the conversation. Maybe that's part of the problem. Humans have a long history of being suspicious of gifts that seem too good to be true. But this isn't a gift, Webb protested. It's a partnership. We're contributing as much to the relationship as we're receiving. That was true, and it was one of the most remarkable aspects of the human-Zerathian partnerships. While the Zerathians offered expanded consciousness and access to higher dimensional perspectives, humans provided something equally valuable: the ability to experience genuine surprise, creativity born from limitation, and the kind of emotional complexity that came from being fully mortal. Martinez had been observing these interactions for days, and she had to admit that the partnership seemed genuinely mutual. The Zerathians were clearly benefiting from their relationships with humans just as much as the humans were growing from Zerathian contact. "There's something else," Martinez said reluctantly. "Earth Command is sending a military assessment team. They want to evaluate whether the Zerathians pose a security threat and whether human personnel here have been compromised." The emotional response from all 13 Zerathians on the station was immediate and powerful. Sarah felt Zeph's shock and hurt, but also a growing sense of protective anger that surprised her with its intensity. "Elena, you need to understand something," Sarah said urgently. "The Zerathians don't just care about their human partners as research subjects or allies. They love us. Genuinely, deeply love us in a way that transcends species boundaries. If Earth sends a military force here with hostile intentions..." "What?" Martinez asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. "The Zerathians won't defend themselves," Sarah continued, "but they will defend us. And their defensive capabilities operate on levels that human military technology can't even detect, much less counter." Webb looked up from his work with Echo, his face pale. "Captain, are you saying the Zerathians would fight to protect us?" "I'm saying they would do whatever was necessary to ensure our safety," Sarah replied carefully. "But their definition of whatever is necessary might include options that humans haven't even imagined." Through her connection with Zeph, Sarah could sense the vast network of Zerathian consciousness that extended far beyond this single station. The 13 individuals here were part of a larger community that spanned dimensions, and that community was becoming increasingly concerned about humanity's response to the partnership offer. Martinez was taking detailed notes. "Sarah, I need you to be very specific about something. If Earth decides that the risks of continued contact outweigh the benefits, what would happen if we ordered all human personnel to return to Earth immediately?" The question sent a wave of complex emotions through the Zerathians, and Sarah felt Zeph's struggle to formulate an answer that humans could understand. "The Zerathians would respect our choice," Sarah said slowly, "but they would also be heartbroken. These partnerships aren't casual relationships for them, they're lifetime bonds that involve a level of emotional investment that humans can barely comprehend." "But they would let us go?" "They would let us go," Sarah confirmed, "but some of us might not want to leave." That was the crux of the issue, and Martinez knew it. The psychological evaluations from Earth had detected something that worried government officials. Several team members were showing signs of what could only be described as homesickness for a place they had never been, combined with a reluctance to consider returning to their previous lives on Earth. Dr. Rodriguez, who had been working with her Zerathian partner Harmony on consciousness research, joined the conversation. "Dr. Martinez, I think you need to understand what we're experiencing here. This isn't about being controlled or converted. It's about finally feeling complete." "Explain that," Martinez said. Rodriguez gestured to the research they had been conducting. "Harmony and I have discovered that human consciousness naturally operates on multiple dimensional levels, but we've never had access to anything beyond the physical plane. The Zerathians aren't changing us, they're helping us access parts of ourselves that have always existed but remained dormant. It's like finally being able to see color after a lifetime of black and white vision," Webb added. "Once you experience it, the thought of going back becomes almost unbearable." Martinez felt a chill as she realized the implications. "Are you saying that humans who form partnerships with Zerathians become unable to function without them?" "Not unable," Sarah corrected, "but unwilling. The relationship becomes so fulfilling, so natural, that separation feels like losing a vital part of yourself." This was exactly what Earth's leaders feared, not mind control or invasion, but the possibility that humans would voluntarily choose Zerathian partnership over human society. The political implications were staggering. "There's something else you need to know," Sarah continued. "The Zerathians have been in contact with their people on Zerath Prime. There are thousands of them there, all waiting to see how this first contact progresses." Martinez felt her heart sink. "Thousands?" "Thousands who have been preparing for centuries to form partnerships with humans specifically," Sarah confirmed. "They've been studying our species from a distance, learning about our needs, our potential, and our unique characteristics. This isn't a random encounter, it's the culmination of a careful, deliberate process. Through Zeph, Sarah could sense the vast community of Zerathians who were watching this moment with a mixture of hope and anxiety. They had invested so much in the possibility of partnership with humanity that failure would be devastating for their entire species. Elena, Sarah said quietly, you need to help Earth understand something crucial. This isn't about humanity being conquered or converted. It's about both species becoming something greater together than either could be alone. But, if humans reject the partnership out of fear, what happens then? Sarah felt Zeph's sadness as she answered. Then, the Zerathians will wait for the next species to find them, and humanity will have missed the greatest opportunity in our history. The weight of that statement settled over the group like a heavy blanket. Martinez realized that she wasn't just observing a first contact situation, she was witnessing a crossroads moment that would determine the future of human civilization. The question now was whether humanity would have the courage to embrace that future or whether fear would cause them to walk away from their greatest chance for growth and transcendence. The military assessment team arrived at Research Station Kronos with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Admiral Jackson Reeves, a veteran of 3 colonial conflicts and a man known for his unwavering dedication to human security, led a force of 50 Marines and scientists aboard the heavy cruiser Defiant. His mission was clear: determine whether the Zerathians posed a threat to humanity and whether the research team had been compromised. What he found challenged everything he thought he knew about alien contact and human nature. Captain Sarah Chen met the Admiral in the station's main docking bay, with Zeph floating beside her in a small gravity field generated by what appeared to be nothing more than the creature's will. The sight of a human officer accompanied by an obviously powerful alien being set Reeves immediately on edge. Captain Chen, the Admiral said formally, his Marines forming a protective perimeter behind him. I'm here under direct orders from Earth Command to assess the situation and ensure the safety of human personnel. Sarah smiled, a genuine expression that surprised Reeves with its warmth and apparent sanity. Welcome aboard, Admiral. We've been expecting you. Have you now? Reeves studied Sarah carefully, looking for signs of coercion or mental influence. What he saw was a competent officer who appeared to be in complete control of her faculties, but there was something different about her that he couldn't quite identify. Zeph made a soft, musical sound that seemed to carry layers of meaning. Reeves noticed that Sarah tilted her head slightly as if listening to something he couldn't hear. Zeph says hello and welcomes you to our home, Sarah translated. It's curious about your intentions but not afraid. It speaks? Reeves asked, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. Not in words, but, yes, it communicates. Zerathians have a form of empathic language that transcends vocal communication. Once you understand how it works, it's remarkably efficient. Admiral Reeves gestured to his team of scientists and security personnel. I need to conduct a full assessment of this facility and all personnel. That includes medical and psychological evaluations for every human on board. Sarah nodded calmly. Of course. We've prepared comprehensive reports, and everyone is eager to share their experiences with you. But, Admiral, I should warn you, what you're about to see will challenge your assumptions about what's possible. As they toured the station, Reeves found himself increasingly amazed by what the research team had accomplished. The technology demonstrations alone were worth the trip to Alpha Centauri. Dr. Webb and his Zerathian partner Echo had developed what could only be described as practical magic, devices that operated on principles that seemed to violate the laws of physics as humans understood them. This dimensional scanner, Webb explained enthusiastically, can detect and analyze structures that exist in up to 11 dimensions simultaneously. With Echo's guidance, we've identified energy patterns that suggest the existence of entire civilizations operating in dimensional spaces parallel to our own. Echo, a Zerathian whose first shifted through colors that didn't exist in human perception, demonstrated the device by revealing the hidden dimensional architecture of the space station itself. What appeared to be simple metal corridors were actually complex multidimensional structures that extended far beyond the visible three-dimensional space. Impossible, muttered Dr. Karen Foster, the Admiral's chief science officer. The energy requirements for such technology should be enormous. That's just it, Webb replied. There are no energy requirements in the conventional sense. The Zerathians don't generate energy, they access it from sources that exist outside our normal dimensional framework. Admiral Reeves watched the demonstration with growing unease. The technology was indeed impressive, but it raised serious questions about the balance of power between humans and Zerathians. If these creatures could manipulate reality itself, what was to stop them from using that power to control or eliminate humanity? As if sensing his thoughts, Echo made a soft sound and approached Reeves directly. The Admiral tensed, his hand moving to his weapon, but the Zerathian simply sat down in front of him and made what could only be described as a gesture of submission. Echo is offering to share a connection with you, Webb explained. It's completely safe, just a brief touch that will allow you to understand what these partnerships really involve. Absolutely not, Reeves replied immediately. I'm not allowing an alien entity to access my mind. Webb looked disappointed but not surprised. I understand your caution, Admiral, but you should know that the connection isn't invasive. The Zerathians can't read your thoughts or control your actions. They can only share emotions and basic concepts. That's what they tell you, Reeves said grimly. But how would you know if they were lying? The question hung in the air for a moment before Dr. Elena Martinez, who had remained on the station to continue her observations, spoke up. Admiral, I've been studying these interactions for weeks. I've monitored brain patterns, stress responses, neurochemical changes, and psychological profiles. There is absolutely no evidence of mental coercion or manipulation. Reeves turned to study Martinez, another officer he respected for her competence and integrity. And what's your assessment, Doctor? Are these people still human? Martinez considered her answer carefully. They're human, Admiral. But they're human in the way that an adult is still the same person they were as a child, fundamentally unchanged but significantly developed. As the tour continued, Reeves met each member of the research team and their Zerathian partners. Every interaction reinforced his initial impression that these were competent, intelligent individuals who appeared to be making their own decisions. But it also became clear that they had all changed in ways that went beyond simple personal growth. Dr. Rodriguez, working with her Zerathian partner Harmony, had developed what could only be called supernatural intuition. She could predict equipment failures, sense emotional distress in team members from across the station, and solve complex problems with insights that seemed to come from nowhere. Tom Harrison and his partner Flux had become living examples of perfect human-machine integration. They could interface directly with the station's systems, optimize mechanical processes through pure intention, and design improvements that pushed the boundaries of what engineering could accomplish. James Park and his Zerathian shield had developed a form of situational awareness that bordered on precognition. They could sense potential threats, identify optimal solutions to security challenges, and maintain perfect safety protocols even in completely novel situations. Admiral, Sarah said as they concluded the tour, I know what you're thinking. These abilities seem impossible, maybe even dangerous. But consider this, every human on this station has become a better version of themselves without losing their essential humanity. Reeves had to admit that was true. Everyone he had met was clearly still the person they had been before coming to the station, but amplified in ways that enhanced their best qualities while minimizing their limitations. Captain Chen, I need to ask the hard question. If Earth Command ordered you to return home immediately and cease all contact with the Zerathians, would you comply? Sarah's answer didn't come immediately. She looked at Zeph, and Reeves could see some kind of silent communication taking place between them. Admiral, that question assumes that compliance and non-compliance are the only options, Sarah finally said. What if there was a third choice? Explain. What if, instead of ordering us to abandon this partnership, Earth chose to embrace it? What if humanity decided to offer the Zerathians something they've never had before, a true planetary alliance? Reeves felt a chill. You're talking about full integration with an alien species. The political implications alone are outweighed by the potential benefits, Sarah finished. Admiral, the Zerathians aren't interested in conquering humanity. They've had the power to do that for millions of years. What they want is something much rarer, genuine friendship with a species that can match their emotional depth and creative potential. Dr. Foster, who had been quietly observing the Zerathian technology demonstrations, spoke up. Admiral, from a purely scientific standpoint, the opportunities here are unprecedented. These beings are offering to help us understand the fundamental nature of reality itself. But Admiral Reeves was thinking beyond science. He was considering defense budgets, territorial disputes, resource allocation, and the thousands of political complications that would arise from formal alliance with an interdimensional species.
Captain, what you're describing would fundamentally alter human civilization. Are you prepared to take responsibility for that level of change?
Before Sarah could answer, every Zerathian on the station suddenly became perfectly still.
Their partners immediately sensed something was wrong, and, within seconds, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. What's happening? Reeves demanded, his military instincts taking over. Sarah's face had gone pale.
Through her connection with Zeph, she was receiving information that chilled her to the bone. Admiral, you need to contact your ship immediately. There's another military fleet approaching, and they're not from Earth. The main display screen activated, showing long-range sensor readings that confirmed Sarah's warning. A massive fleet of ships was approaching the system, ships that used technology similar to what the Zephyrians had employed, but modified in ways that suggested hostile intent.
Who are they?
Reeves asked, already reaching for his communicator.
Zeph made a series of complex sounds that Sarah translated with growing alarm.
They're Zephyrians, but not the peaceful researchers we encountered. They're a military faction that believes the Zerathians should be captured and their abilities weaponized. Admiral Reeves suddenly understood that the situation had just become far more complicated than a simple first contact scenario. Humanity was about to be caught in the middle of an interspecies conflict, and their new Zerathian allies might be their only hope for survival. The test of human-Zerathian partnership was about to become a trial by fire, and the future of both species hung in the balance. The Zephyrian warfleet emerged from hyperspace like an ominous tide of metal and energy, their ships bristling with weapons that operated on principles Admiral Reeves couldn't begin to understand. 50 vessels, each the size of a small moon, arranged themselves in a perfect sphere around the research station with mathematical precision that spoke of overwhelming technological superiority. Admiral, Captain Chen called from the station's command center, where every human and Zerathian had gathered, were receiving a communication from the fleet commander. Admiral Reeves strode to the communication console, his marines forming a protective perimeter around the room. The face that appeared on the screen was reptilian, with scales that shifted through shades of green and gold, and eyes that held the cold intelligence of a born predator. I am Fleet Commander Vexhai of the Zephyrian Military Dominion, the being spoke in perfect, emotionless English.
You are in possession of stolen Zephyrian research subjects. Return them immediately, and your deaths will be swift. Reeves felt his jaw clench.
In all his years of military service, he had never backed down from a threat, regardless of the odds.
This is Admiral Jackson Reeves of the Human Colonial Fleet.
These beings are not research subjects, they are our allies, and they are under our protection. The Zephyrian commander's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Your species is unknown to us, but your ignorance is evident. The creatures you call allies are weapons of mass destruction. They have already destroyed entire civilizations through their corrupting influence. Through her connection with Seth, Sarah could sense the Zerathians' deep pain at the accusation. The emotions flowing through their bond were complex: shame, anger, and profound sadness at being misunderstood by their own former allies.
Commander Vexhai, Sarah interjected, stepping forward, the Zerathians never destroyed anyone. The species that disappeared chose transcendence willingly. It was evolution, not destruction.
You speak as one already corrupted, the Zephyrian replied coldly. The evidence is in your voice, in your stance, in the very fact that you defend these parasites. They have made you into their puppet, as they did to our researchers. Dr. Webb, who had been monitoring the approaching fleet's energy signatures, looked up from his console with alarm. Admiral, their weapons are charging.
These aren't conventional energy weapons, they're designed to disrupt multidimensional structures. The implications hit Sarah immediately.
They're going to try to sever our connections with the Zerathians by force. Zeph and the other Zerathians began making sounds that Sarah had never heard before, deep, resonant tones that seemed to vibrate through the station's hull itself. Through their empathic bond, she could sense their preparation for something momentous. Admiral Reeves, Sarah said urgently, the Zerathians are preparing to defend us, but their defense mechanisms operate on levels that could accidentally harm humans.
We need to make a choice right now. What kind of choice? Reeves demanded, even as he watched the tactical display show the Zephyrian weapons reaching full charge.
Trust them completely, or order them to stand down and face the Zephyrians alone.
The decision point had arrived faster than anyone had anticipated.
Admiral Reeves found himself facing a choice that would determine not just the fate of everyone on the station, but possibly the future relationship between humanity and the most powerful beings they had ever encountered.
Captain Chan, he said formally, in your professional opinion, are the Zerathians capable of protecting this station?
Yes, sir.
But, more than that, they're capable of protecting Earth itself if necessary. The tactical display showed the Zephyrian fleet beginning their final approach.
Weapon signatures that defied human understanding were reaching critical levels, and the countdown to what would likely be a massacre had begun.
Admiral Reeves made his decision. All human personnel, establish physical contact with your Zerathian partners immediately. That's a direct order.
The response was immediate. Every human on the station reached out to touch their Zerathian ally, and the change that followed was unlike anything in human experience. Sarah felt her consciousness expand beyond the confines of her individual mind. Through Zeph, she became connected not just to the Zerathian on the station, but to the vast network of consciousness that spanned dimensions and included thousands of Zerathian minds working in perfect harmony.
But she didn't lose herself in that vastness.
Instead, she remained fundamentally Sarah Chen while gaining access to perspectives and abilities that transformed her understanding of reality itself. Admiral Reeves, who had reluctantly placed his hand on Echo at Dr. Webb's insistence, experienced the most profound moment of his military career. Through the Zerathian's consciousness, he could perceive the Zephyrian fleet not as overwhelming technological superiority, but as a collection of individual beings driven by fear, misunderstanding, and a fundamental inability to comprehend the true nature of Zerathian existence. "My God," Reeves whispered as he understood what they were facing.
"They're not evil, they're terrified." Through the expanded consciousness network, the humans could see the truth that the Zephyrians couldn't grasp.
The species that had disappeared hadn't been destroyed or converted, they had chosen to move beyond physical existence because they had reached the natural end of their evolutionary journey. The Zerathians had simply facilitated a transition that was inevitable. But the Zephyrians, being a species that defined themselves through conquest and control, interpreted this transcendence as a form of ultimate defeat. They saw the Zerathians not as benevolent guides but as existential threats to the very concept of individual survival. "They think the Zerathians are going to force transcendence on everyone," Sarah realized through her connection with the network.
"They can't understand that it's always voluntary." The Zephyrian weapons fired.
What followed challenged every human assumption about the nature of defense and protection.
The Zerathians didn't generate shields or return fire with conventional weapons. Instead, they simply stepped aside from reality.
The devastating energy beams that should have obliterated the research station passed harmlessly through dimensional space that no longer contained their targets. To outside observers, it would appear that the weapons had simply failed to function, but the humans connected to the Zerathian network understood what had actually happened. The station, everyone on it, and the space immediately around it had been temporarily shifted into a parallel dimensional framework where the Zephyrian weapons couldn't reach them. They were still in the same location from their own perspective, but they existed in a layer of reality that was inaccessible to conventional attack. "Impossible," breathed Dr. Foster, who was maintaining contact with a Zerathian that had introduced itself as Serenity. "They've moved us into a parallel dimensional space without any apparent energy expenditure." Commander Vexhi's voice crackled over the communication system, filled with frustration and growing desperation.
"Dimensional phase shifting. Of course. The parasites have revealed their true capabilities.
All ships, prepare quantum displacement weapons."
Through the Zerathian network, the humans could sense the Zephyrian commander's escalating panic.
He was facing a level of technological capability that his species couldn't match, and his response was to resort to increasingly dangerous weapons. "Admiral," Sarah said, her voice carrying new harmonics that came from her expanded consciousness, "the Zephyrians are preparing to use weapons that could destabilize this entire solar system."
"The Zerathians can protect us, but not the rest of the system's planets." Admiral Reeves understood immediately.
Earth, with its billions of human inhabitants, was only a few light hours away.
If the Zephyrians deployed system-killing weapons, humanity's homeworld would be caught in the crossfire.
But, through his connection with Echo, Reeves also understood something else.
The Zerathians weren't just powerful, they were wise.
They had been waiting for exactly this moment, when humanity would have to choose between safety and principle, between survival and doing what was right. "What are our options?" he asked. The answer came not from Sarah but from Zeph itself, speaking through the human Zerathian network in words that all the humans could understand simultaneously. We can end this peacefully, the collective Zerathian consciousness communicated, but only if humanity is willing to take a stand that will change your species forever.
Explain, Reeves demanded.
Speak for Earth.
Formally ally with us.
Make it clear to the galaxy that humanity and Zerathians are partners, not captor and captive.
Show the Zephyrians that their fear is based on misunderstanding, not reality. The implications were staggering. Admiral Reeves was being asked to commit humanity to a formal alliance with interdimensional beings without authorization from Earth Command, the Global Council, or any other governmental authority.
But, as the Zephyrian quantum displacement weapons charged and the fate of the solar system hung in the balance, he realized that formal authorization was a luxury they couldn't afford. Computer, open a channel to Earth Command, emergency priority, Reeves ordered. The connection was established within seconds, and the face of General Patricia Morrison, Reeves' superior officer, appeared on screen. Admiral, we've been monitoring the situation.
What's your assessment?
General, I'm formally requesting permission to negotiate a mutual defense treaty with the Zerathians on behalf of humanity. The alternative is the possible destruction of our solar system. General Morrison's expression didn't change, but Reeves could see her calculating the risks and benefits at light speed.
Admiral, are you certain that such a treaty would be honored by both sides? Through his connection with the Zerathian network, Reeves could sense the absolute certainty of their commitment. Yes, General. I stake my career and my life on it. Then, you have my authorization. Negotiate the treaty, Admiral. And, may God help us all. Admiral Reeves turned to face the assembled humans and Zerathians, knowing that his next words would echo through history. Commander Vexhai, this is Admiral Reeves. I am authorized to inform you that as of this moment, humanity and the Zerathian species are formally allied under mutual defense treaty. Any attack on Zerathian beings will be considered an act of war against Earth.
The silence that followed stretched for what felt like eternity.
Then, Commander Vexhai's voice returned, filled with disbelief. You would ally yourselves with parasites? You would doom your own species for the sake of creatures that will ultimately consume you?
No, Admiral Reeves replied firmly, we would ally ourselves with beings who have shown us what we could become. The only thing being consumed here is ignorance. Through the Zerathian network, every human on the station could sense the moment when the Zephyrian fleet made their decision.
Fear won over wisdom, and the quantum displacement weapons fired.
What happened next became known as the moment of transcendence, when humanity first glimpsed the true scope of Zerathian capabilities. The weapons designed to destabilize spacetime itself simply ceased to exist as the Zerathians manipulated reality at a fundamental level, converting destructive energy into harmless light that painted beautiful aurora patterns across the system's skies. More importantly, every being in the Zephyrian fleet suddenly found themselves connected to the same empathic network that linked humans and Zerathians. For the first time, they experienced the truth about Zerathian intentions, not conquest or conversion, but genuine love and desire for partnership. The war ended not with weapons, but with understanding. Commander Vexhai himself requested permission to come aboard the research station, where he formed the first Zephyrian-Zerathian partnership in centuries. 6 months later, Admiral Reeves stood in the assembly hall of the new Zerathian Alliance headquarters, watching representatives from dozens of species sign treaties of partnership and mutual growth. Humanity had become the bridge that allowed the galaxy to finally understand what the Zerathians had been offering all along. As he observed the ceremony, Reeves felt Serenity's gentle presence in his mind. The Zerathian had become his partner after Echo chose to work with a Zephyrian engineer who was developing new forms of peaceful technology. Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this? Serenity asked through their connection. Reeves smiled, remembering the fear and suspicion he had felt when he first arrived at the research station. Never in my wildest dreams. But I'm learning that the best futures are always the ones we never could have imagined. Through his connection with Serenity and the greater Zerathian network, Admiral Reeves could sense the vast community of consciousness that now included thousands of species working together toward common goals of growth, understanding, and the endless exploration of what was possible when beings chose partnership over fear. Humanity had passed the test not by proving their worthiness through strength or intelligence, but by demonstrating their capacity for trust, growth, and the courage to embrace the unknown. In doing so, they had become the species that finally helped the galaxy understand that evolution's greatest achievement wasn't transcendence beyond physical existence, but the ability to find meaning, love, and purpose within it. The Zerathians had waited millions of years to find partners who could help them remember what it meant to be mortal while showing them new ways to be divine. In humanity, they found both teachers and students, partners and friends, and the key to a future that neither species could have achieved alone. As Admiral Reeves watched a human child play with a young Zerathian in the station's garden, both beings laughing in ways that transcended language barriers, he knew that this was just the beginning of the greatest adventure in galactic history.